Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Christos here and
Foster.
Foster. And this is our Halloween edition. You know, we didn't even know if we can make it, but we are here in a very rainy Rhode Island now, in the house of our favorite witch, Loreen Ratti, who so generously has invited us to her home. So we are in the house of a practicing witch, and I thought it would be really appropriate today to talk and dedicate this podcast to the craft, which is a lot about witches, or what we call witchcraft, about misogyny, because it's connected to it, and what we would call, or what I would call, the rise of the feminine, divine feminine, right? We talk a lot about these days about the 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 role of a woman in spirituality, especially as a crucial role in changing and transforming our society, basically. And now, funny enough, we have new political role models in Italy and in England again. We will see if it goes to the best. But I think at this time, male or female, I think when somebody is missing a spiritual development and spiritual maturity, it doesn't really matter if you're a woman or a man. If you reject change and fearmonger anything about change, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, it's going to go backwards anyway. But that's why we have this podcast, because we want to inspire you to discover what we would call the divine feminine itself. Foster, what do you think?
Well, the divine feminine comes in many forms, many shapes, many things, connected to the moon especially. But also that the divine feminine, first of all, we have the women of the craft. These are women who study to be witches, who have a coven or a mentor or solitary witches, and they have it in their bloodlines, or somebody has really initiated them into witchcraft. Then you have herbalists who were accused of being witches, but they were actually herbalists. They were
Pharmacists.
pharmacists, pharmacute, or they were women, especially who raised
Let me
children and who birthed children. There's quite a few of those that are midwives.
let me
There were
ask.
so many different kinds of female shamans as
Right,
well, who were not necessarily witches because they're not
right.
initiated into witchcraft.
Wh-
So I want to make all these distinctions, even though now witches, of course, have to learn their craft. They have to learn how to, first of all, do work with herbs and plants, plant teachers. They have to be able to also become a medium, a channel. I mean, there are basically 5 different spokes of the
Let's
wheel.
let's talk a little bit about the term witch,
Yes,
which is which
can
is
be can be quite derogatory,
quite
at least in our
derogatory.
time.
Absolutely. I think that when you see how it's being used also to depict a woman in power, or in not in subordination, we would call them witches, right? Snakes, witches, demons. Of course, in our history, if we look back at the divine feminine, it's been quite marginalized, basically. But always the moment when the feminine refuses to obey, basically, you
Yes,
see.
yes.
And that's why for us, of course, it's very important when we study the history of the feminine, and Foster did it much longer than I
Sophia.
did. But we're talking about a way longer pre-Abrahamic time, where the feminine was revered and worshipped and had the altars to Sophia and the altars to Asherah, right? But we can see through our scriptures, especially, that women have been almost systematically reduced to a mouthpiece of the patriarchy, especially when they had some form of power, I want to say, or some form of yeah, power is a good word, I think, right? So
Well, there's the Great Mother, which is Pachamama, or she has many, many names. And then Gaia, of course, now is more recent name. But then we have the Great Ladies, the First Lady,
right,
who is the human being who, the first enlightened woman is Lilith.
Lilith.
And in shamanism, you go to a cave, you ask for the animals to come, and you hear herds of animals in the darkness of a cave in its center. You do a ritual to call them. And then Lilith comes. She also comes in a cave. And most male shamans don't make it past that. They don't ever understand Lilith. They think, oh, she's trying to tempt me or something. In fact, it's the opposite. If you accept Lilith, if she comes to you, what happens next is she initiates you into the void, into other understandings, the divine feminine. It is, for me, I think that was the greatest enlightenment.
But we have to go back to the idea and really explain the word witch. As again, I think that it is such a common term now, and you know, the people say, you know, I want to become a witch. You can't become a witch. Either you are or you're not. You see, it's like any spiritual skill. It has to be embodied, or more important, it's like an echo. The tradition, as we like to call it, or the current will call you. But the idea is also what we're talking about, what Foster's talking about, is when we look into our scriptures and we see in Genesis 1, for example, and God, you know, whatever that means, but God created the first female and the first male, which is Adam and his first wife, Lilith. And Lilith is made and from the same fabric, the same dust, the same earth, at the same moment and the same time. And so when there is a power game described in Genesis 1, you just read your Bible, people. But here it is in Genesis 1, a description of Lilith being rebellious almost. And she says, I'm not going to bow down to anybody because I've been made at the same moment, at the same time. So she declares equality. So Lilith, in the craft, the way I learned it and the way I researched it, represents rebellion, but also freedom, authenticity. It represents the right to declare your true identity. You see,
woman in her power.
A woman in her power. And of course, you know, everybody gets upset. You know, it's a big, you know, it's a garden full of Karens, as we would say today. Everybody wants to talk to the manager, so they kick her out. But the thing is, if you look at scriptures, and I had the luck and the ability to look into scriptures, she is not only described as the first woman, but as the first witch. You see, in that term. But again, the word is more of a modern term because, and why is it a derogatory term? Because it's been used by the church to justify the extermination of powerful women. And we're going to talk about this a little bit.
Witches are really wise women. They are wisdom, and that's the real
initiated.
word.
They're initiated people. But Lilith leaves voluntarily with her 3 children. Of course, she's demonized, you see. And she returns, Genesis 2, she returns back as the snake and says to Eve, you better eat from that fruit of the tree of knowledge and awaken. You see, and get a grip what's going on here. So in the Ben Shirach, in a Jewish book, the snake is the hero, by the way, of the whole story, who helps Adam and Eve to awaken from the tyranny or the illusion in which they are. And that's what it says, that they eat from the fruit and suddenly, oh my God, what's happening to us here? So they're understanding,
aware,
enlightenment, but also the enlightenment reveals the manipulation, you see. And so again,
which is why Apple Computers has that symbol. This is where you get knowledge. You must eat from the apple.
It's quite interesting how they choose, you know, just a little hint on the side. But I think it's interesting because Eve is, of course, in Genesis 2. There's 2 creation stories, Genesis 1 and Genesis 2. Is now declared the first woman in creation. Well, hold on a second. What happened to the other one in chapter 1? I mean, if you try to gaslight people, at least, you know, make it more elegant. But we see here, again, in its core, misogyny.
Because Eve is the root of the word evil. So again, all her progeny is considered evil, including Nerea and all her daughters.
And her daughters, and exactly. And so there is documentation of a much more complex story about it. But you hardly will find it in the official text, because God forbid you have an opinion. You see,
but so Lilith wrote her own gospel.
There is. Let's not say this in a sense like she had like a typewriter and started writing, but there is an oral tradition which I think survived, and we know about it because we still can talk about it. Something that is not true cannot be traced back to something, and it becomes a fairy tale basically, right?
But before that is the queen of the witches, which is Hecate. Hecate.
Well, Hecate is the Greek version, and before that it's Sophia.
Sophia.
Then it is Asherah.
Sacred
So there's
Gerard.
many
Yes.
many names of it, but this is what happens here. If you read and research the history, is Lilith, Eve are people, are women of power because they're empower themselves. Immediately they're declared evil, the root of evil, and this is what happens to you. And that's what the Christian God says, do what I say, or I will put you into the pit of fire for all eternity, but I love you. Right?
I think
But
why
the
why do
idea
we
is,
talk about witches? Because they erased all these
Right.
powerful women in the Bible.
Right.
They erased, and only the women who they toe the line of patriarchy or the line of
Right.
Abraham, or not the women who followed Melchizedek, not the women who followed Lilith, not the ones who truly followed themselves, their own empowerments.
but also the woman who
They're erased from the Bible. They're erased
But
from most history.
most history, but we know they existed because we have much older
Yes.
texts,
Yes.
also non-religious text.
Yeah.
Because you see,
And there's a Nana, there's
there's
Samaria,
a
so many
rich
ladies.
history of women in power, and
That's
power
true.
is connection to spirit, connection to the divine, connection to the ability to also to educate. And God forbid, no pun intended, God forbid, we all have access to this power and we all are connected to it, and we don't need God anymore in that sense. You see, it's always a systemic reduction of the feminine, especially when knowledge, power, authority
Yes.
and manifests.
Why is it so important now? Because Pluto has made a full revolution through the galaxy and is returning back to its original point, which happens every 1,000 years especially.
Yeah.
And that's the change from patriarchy to matriarchy. 1,000 years ago it was matriarchy to patriarchy.
Right.
And we are now undergoing that. And we all feel it. How many women come to learn spiritually? How many women are joining, Wiccan circles or
But what we're saying is, it is important, male or female, because look,
and male.
I mean,
witches
I don't want to judge it now politically, and I don't want to make it about it. But if we see where Italy is going right now, where England is going right now, these are women, women leaders. But look where it's going. I mean, look what they represent. You see,
Matrifocal ideas, yes.
that's exactly what it is, and it's just.
Like fascism or
We
Iron
call
Lady.
we call it conservatism now, but that's what it is in the end.
Yes.
But you see, it is always about controlling people, controlling ability. For us, of course, it's the empowerment of your own soul, basically the empowerment of your own abilities, right? That you don't need to wait for somebody to come and liberate you from something, or you don't need to ask for absolution, or that a certain emotional, we say when a man screams he's powerful, when a woman screams she's hysterical.
Right.
It's misogyny in its end.
And
It's just misogyny, nothing else.
And when a woman is a mother, we don't want to put her down or something, that it's not really a path. It is a great path. Just many, many women over history have been mothers, have had families, and have had quite difficult relationships, and many times have been suppressed for many lives.
Right.
And now they are totally breaking out.
Right.
Now you have freedom, you have liberation. You can even end, in a way, families by saying, I'm not going to have children. You know what I mean? I'm going to be independent. I don't need to do that anymore. I've done that, 5 or 6 past incarnations. So this is quite a liberation all over the world. Now we have it in Iran, right? Where women
Absolutely.
are rebelling, and they must.
Absolutely. And this is, I think, one of the best examples of the enlightened and awakening feminine. And it's funny, in our Western world, we deal with this patriarchal women who just basically are, repeating what men used to say.
And there are many male witches,
but here are,
too.
of course, but here are women in Iran over hair, over the right to show themselves, or the right to reveal themselves. I think, when I look back at it, I think these are the true transformers. We dedicate this podcast to every woman in Iran and the Middle East, because you are the real life changers and the real world changers.
The woman in Saudi Arabia who drive a car.
And you are witches.
Right.
And witches, in the best sense of the word, you are declaring your independence, and that's what makes you a witch. it's a declaration of true identity.
Yes.
Beside the idea, of course, that a witch is a spiritual person, has a gift or many gifts, and that these gifts can be inherited from one tradition to the other.
And they have been
But-
misunderstood,
absolutely.
misaligned.
But why? Because witches and witchcraft and the craft itself has been always political. You see, because women and men, we call them witches. They're not warlocks or wizards. We call them witches. It just stuck, basically. But the idea is that we had people who were revered as advisors, as guiding stones in a society.
Green men, green
men,
women.
exactly,
you know,
healers.
the
word
lady of the forest.
pharmakute
Yes.
is the root word for the word pharmacists or pharmacy. So these people were always, not always, but very often educated in the healing of nature or with nature, right?
And some men were certainly protectors of women,
Absolutely,
especially if they were
absolutely,
witches.
yes.
And we have to honor all those men as well.
And we know that these men existed because they wrote about their mothers. And so, you know, we know this from citizenship, you know, when your parents are Greek, no matter where you're born, you automatically have Greek citizenship, right? And that is the same idea in this form. If one of your parents is a spiritual initiated, you receive the initiation. What you're going to do with it is another question. But we inherit the blood of these people, you see. And so let's clarify what witchcraft means for us. It is the execution of personal power. It has nothing to do with voodoo dolls, with needles, with riding on the broom around the fire and all that nonsense. Not nonsense, but this is not the image that the church and Hollywood projected.
No,
Unfortunately,
it's not that.
it's not. It is, you are a witch the moment you declare your independence and you declare your freedom from rules of oppression.
Yes.
And that is the idea.
And it involves elemental wisdom because you're invoking the four directions, the four
Right,
elements,
right.
and you're becoming in a coven, certainly, the elements, especially if
Right.
you have four ladies together or men and women, whatever, and you come together, one is earth, one is fire, one is water, one is
Right,
air.
as
And
representatives.
what they create together is quite powerful.
Yeah.
When you combine in groups, when you raise a cone of power, when
Yeah.
you invoke together, when you have a single line purpose,
Yeah.
and some magic as
Yeah.
well, or a ritual.
Something,
That's also
something
witchcraft.
interesting in the feminine craft that I realized, and I want to repeat this because it has a connotation that we kind of referred to now, is that a lot of women in the craft say, when it comes to female or feminine aspects or feminine subjects, men should just be quiet. And I completely agree with it, because again, it's the idea that we need male spokesperson to
No.
protect. Women are very capable, more
Speaking for
than
themselves.
that, to speak for themselves.
Especially when they've been silenced.
And this is
Yeah.
amazing when we see now in a political sense how many men worry about uteruses, about periods. I mean, they could not even find a G-spot if you would point it out with them in pink. But here they are making these decisions. You see
This
what I mean?
anti-abortion movement, this
Right,
anti-feminine body
right.
movement, going back to the idea of Eve, and the church is teaching them that women truly are just mothers at home, shut up, and,
Yeah.
if you're not,
Yeah.
if you're rebellious, you're evil.
Right.
So this rebellion is occurring inside of people.
Yeah.
But many people have no idea about that. They've been so, be a good girl, be a nice person,
Be
don't make
comfortable.
waves,
Be comfortable.
don't go against
Don't
your
question.
husband. Oh God.
We know better than you.
No.
We know what's right for you, you see. But we live now in a time where this, like it or not, has changed. You see, everybody wonders about women's rights, and they're like, it's not good for women to have that many rights. Dude, you're 50 years too late, because you have to consider, in Switzerland, you told me, women were allowed to vote when?
Much later, in the 60s, and then it didn't really come together till 92.
I mean, you know what I mean? We're talking about Switzerland, not, that's the idea. So,
The oppression of the feminine.
absolutely, you see, and I think that especially women at the moment who, when one gets hurt, like in Iran, they all come out. You know what I mean? They all come out. And it's really not about hair anymore, but it is about the systemic demonization of the female body, the female sexuality, and the female ability to give life.
Or in India, when they set women on fire.
Right.
The
Right.
horror of all
Yeah,
that.
right. Yeah.
And in many other countries,
Yeah.
too.
You see, this is something that women, it's in the hand of women to organize themselves. They don't have to agree. I think we don't have to agree with everybody. You know, even being conservative is not a negative thing. Like liberal doesn't mean you're all just, sex crazed drug addicts. You know, but I think that to come to a common point where we realize that we all have a certain amount of power. And again, I don't want to separate the idea of witchcraft only about the feminine, but it is the feminine that has been marginalized the most, especially when it comes to power.
Well, when you meet a woman who, over a distance, has a candle, and she lights the candle without ever touching it, or she lights an entire amount of candles,
Right.
there's a woman in her power.
Right.
And when you first witness that, you're never the same. And many male witches can do that as well.
Absolutely.
Like crystals, whatever. But it is something when you see them drawing up a cone of power, when you see them invoking,
Controlling the elements.
extraordinary.
Controlling the elements, which is a science. And it's I think it is in its essence a very feminine practice itself.
Drawing down the moon,
Right.
having kundalini through the moon.
Right.
That exceptional moment. That is true, what I would say, a true coven or a true witchcraft
Right.
when it comes together. Coven is a group of women in their power working together.
And that's why we want to understand in my research about witches, how that even started. First of all, in the craft, in that earth religion, the pagan earth religion, the devil does not exist. The idea of it doesn't exist. It's not mentioned anywhere. And interesting enough, when the first accusations start to come up, right, it's very often around the shameless feminine, the woman who is not ashamed of who she is, of her body, of her sexuality also. But then comes, I want to say organized religion, because it's not only Catholics, it's organized religion that says that needs to be systemically be destroyed. And this is how, in my research, especially in Europe, the word witch hunt or the witches hunt
terrible.
came together. I mean, we have a whole history about this. In that time, you have to all understand, in that time, women were landowners and they were basically wealthy. I don't talk about billions of, but they were owners of land. And so when sometimes the men died ahead, and they were widows.
Or
they,
wars.
Or wars or illness. Women often survived their husbands. So they were landowners, rich widows, if you want, you see. And
The church comes
the
in.
church comes in and says, what do you think doing with this land? Don't you want to donate it? Don't you want to give it? Don't you want to get married? Don't you want... And when a woman said, I'm not interested in all this, I'm pretty content with where I am, and refused to surrender her property in any shape or form, then the church would come and say, you know what? We're going to invent the devil. And we're going to say to everybody in a very stern and very, command performance, Oscar performance, that there is the devil, there are witches, and these people control everybody. And so they start a mass hysteria based on fear, and the outcome we can now follow through. So witch hunt and the witch itself, the demonization as a woman, begins as a political act of the organized religion to steal property. Otherwise, nowhere in the Bible it says the church should be made with gold and silver and what it is today. Because you see, our friend Laurie Bruno in Salem, who we adore and we love, and she's an authentic Sicilian witch, but also a wonderful crone and a powerful witch. Don't cross her. But the idea is that she says, what was the reference that she said in that? Oh my God, I'm blanking. But she said something so interesting that the craft is the only religion that never declared war in the name of any god. It's the only religion that never said, my God told me to kick your God's ass. Never happened. Never. It's a peaceful religion. You see, it's a peaceful, harmonious, but the power lies not in the craft. It lies in the person. Every ritual is a celebration of each person. And Laurie says, I made all my members high priestesses, so at least the bitching will stop, because why is she a high priest, not me? So she said, okay, you're all high priestesses, done with it. She's very funny. She's very funny, but also a very smart woman. But again, we have here a great example of why it is so important that we maintain, and we as men especially help to maintain women's history. We have to help restore the balance
without censoring it.
Without censoring it, you see, and without telling a woman how to do it. But again, it is a long way to go, because when we mention these things in sessions, for example, or anything, they all freak out. They all freak out, because it's not about lighting a candle and wishing a different path to manifest. It's rather, I need permission to tap into this kind of power. And this is something that me and Foster, very individually in our lives, you don't need to ask for any permission. You have to stop that nonsense, okay? I know you're all a little needy, and you like the idea of being patted on the head with a gold star. Stop it. Stop being idiots. You have no reason to wait for anyone, physical or non-physical, to give you permission to tap into your own power.
Well, there were so many enlightened women over history. There was Diana in Italy, and Diana and Aradia certainly taught magic, and they taught magic to people to overcome oppression, to overcome tyrants. Right. And we have tyrants in the world now. So now I would say Dianic ritual is very important because of those tyrants. Another thing is, whenever you go in Europe to many, many churches that are old, you will find a dead woman in the walls of the church. So one of the men who will have worked on the church to build it would sacrifice his wife and put her inside of the walls. And this is a horrific thing to me, that when I go to a church, what do I see? I see, in fact, a dead corpse in the walls. This is the horror. This is what we call misogyny.
Right.
This is that hatred of the feminine, blaming everything on Eve. Yeah. And this is what we strive to overcome. This is why we don't want those churches anymore. We don't want them in the walls, because they're a reminder of everything that went wrong in the past.
I think also Western women very often say, look how terrible it is, because we're flying to Egypt in a few weeks, again, for a tour. And of course you see a lot of covered up people there. You see, and in the West, how can they live like this? Just because, I don't know when I heard this, but I said, the US right now is a third world country with a Gucci belt. Okay? We really cannot afford at this point to open our mouths too much, because there are many men and many patriarchal systems who would love to put you all in little veils and make you shut up, by the way. You see? So don't think just because it's 5,000 miles away in some different religious environment, it doesn't affect you. I think the oppression and the inequity that happens is just there. It's just there. And it won't solve itself anytime soon. But that's why we always talk about the female shamanism. And female shamanism is the craft. I don't call it witchcraft, because it sounds like you're running around with a broom and play Halloween. No, okay? It is not even, buying 20 candles and 50 herbs and God knows what. It is nothing but a declaration of your unity with the all that is. And to, you say always in soul retrieval is the idea to call upon your power to return. You don't really need much stuff for it, but it's a celebration and a re-immersion, isn't it?
Things.
Absolutely.
Yes, there's been tremendous traumas.
Yeah.
Now, many people confuse female shamans with witches, and sometimes they're not, because when you're in New Mexico, like I lived in New Mexico for a long time, many curanderas do not associate with witches. Okay, so there's a rivalry that went on there. That's from the old country. It's from before.
Right.
And witches do their things in private, and they didn't want anybody peeking or looking. And sometimes, young boys would look and see, and then they would get, they would get it back to them.
Right.
And then the curanderos would try to protect the families, You see, there's even movies about that, everything. A curandera, a female herbalist, whatever, is not necessarily a witch.
Right.
Okay? So,
Right.
people who learn the craft, they might actually even learn the same things. They might even learn how to shapeshift or how to have a power animal that they work with. Usually a very well-trained witch or a very well-trained curandera in New Mexico could change into their animal.
Right.
Like usually a bird.
Right.
So they have a lot in common. It's really the intention.
Yeah.
It's really
Yeah.
the nature of the rituals, but it's very much the same rituals.
Right.
So, again, intention has a lot to do with it. So some curanderas had fights with witches just because of their intention. But witches also were misaligned, misunderstood by curanderas.
Right.
My idea is I would like them all to come together now. I would like them to share knowledge. I would like them to see the common ground now. And I think that's what's going to happen
Yeah.
in this matriarchy.
I think this is so important, and that also happens in any part of society. Women are coming after women, and I think a woman who's not supporting a woman is an enemy. I don't have a different opinion about it. It's the same way I see a man who's not supporting a woman is an enemy. You see, I'm using the strong word, but either you're for it or you're against it. You see, and we're always against something when we fear to lose our status quo. That's all it is. Where will we end up if we let women run the country? Well, look at Italy. I mean, now we're in conservatism, as we want to call it, right? I mean, it's fascism, but you see what I mean? Even that kind of change, sometimes it's how can I say this? It's difficult to see the change, but change without spiritual training, without a spiritual, let me say the word enlightenment because I like it, and maturity, it doesn't matter who you put in a place of power, it's going to end up bad. You see? So it's the maturity of the soul and the maturity of the intention, I think, that needs to be focused upon.
And there are baby witches, there are mature witches, there's so many different
Right.
kinds. El Elyon, though, it means mother, father, God.
Right.
So
The supreme.
God, the supreme, the God,
Yes.
the goddess.
Yeah.
And then there are minor gods, like Yahweh is a minor god who is a child of them, who is kind of a rebellious,
It's kind of
angry little kid
it's
who's
kind of-
quite
yeah.
negative and,
That-
how can I say it, wants attention all the time, like a narcissistic personality
Right.
disorder. Well, if your God is a narcissist, like Yahweh,
Yeah.
with all that power and everything, and granting it to Abraham, granting it to Noah, remember, that is not the lineage that is actually true. There is a much different lineage, and it has been also written out of the Bible.
Yeah.
And the real lineage,
And
when
every scripture.
when they go to see a witch, certainly in the Bible, and she does things, and she's an oracle or whatever, many people get their knowledge through them because they really have a contact to the other side.
Right.
To the dead, for instance. That is another hallmark of a witch, one of the 5, is the ability to speak to the dead, to commune, which of course we call by many names now.
Necromancy.
Necromancy.
Necromancy, by the way, it sounds so Hollywood dramatic. No, but necromancy is talking to somebody who's not there. So every phone call you make is necromancy. So get over yourselves. Get over yourselves, okay?
Or communicating with the dead, yeah.
I mean, if somebody 500 years ago would see you now, they would basically just, their eyes would pop out because you're talking to a black screen. You're scrying, basically.
Scrying.
You see?
Another gift.
Another gift, the ability
develop
to
as a witch.
see, and by that to have a connection to source energy. And because we said in our last podcast, right, spirit energy, when it comes to as a channel, how do I identify that it's real? It will never ever speak in negativity. It's just not interested in warning people. Or during COVID, I remember a lot of channels on Facebook, of course, because that's how it works. Suddenly it was all a Trump advertising, basically. And I mean, why would a being from a spiritual realm care about that stuff? You know what I mean? It's amazing, because if it's not in a positive sense enlightening, not only to the person who does the channel, but to all who listens, I guarantee you, if that's the only thing I can teach you is, if it doesn't benefit people, it's not real. It will always come with a solution. Always come with a solution. always come with happiness, always come with joy, always come with, not with, I warn you. And we're back to the idea, we have the solution and not you. So you are wrong and we are the right ones. See? And I mean,
No.
we're always running around the same circles, basically.
One thing I do love in witchcraft is the grimoire, which is that all the knowledge of a witch goes into a book. And sometimes generations and generations.
Right.
It's a diary, though, of everything they know.
Right.
Of all the rituals, all the different spells. And spells are, again, intention.
Prayers.
We can call it by different names.
Declarations.
And so all this knowledge, if there were no successors for a witch, she would be buried with her grimoire, which is a book. Usually quite leather-bound, quite fascinating. Or a whole coven will have a book.
Right.
And when the last person dies out, they'd be buried. So to get the knowledge of a witch, people started to basically go to these graveyards, dig up these witches, and take the books. And so there are volumes and volumes of grimoires. So we do have a tremendous amount of knowledge from witches throughout time, because so many of these lineages died out. Now, when we went to Lake Nemi, which is, you fly to Rome Fiumicino, the airport. And when you go there, very close to Fiumicino is Lake Nemi. And you just take a taxi there, and there is a campground, and there is, all these beautiful herbs, always. And there's the place of Diana, her wells. And you bathe yourself with the water of the well. You drink from the well. You're drinking the wisdom of Diana. It was a mountain that opens like a vagina, built into the side. And it overlooks a beautiful lake that looks like a mirror. And they call it Diana looking into her mirror. And this beauty of being there was so many aristocratic families all wanted that power, that energy of Diana. They wanted to study her. But originally, when we went there and we walked around, a white dog came, a white hound. Again, Diana's dog. And then we did a ritual to honor Diana and Aradia. And again, it was 7 women and me. Oh, really? Actually, it was 6 women and me. There was the 7 of us, and we did a ritual in which they honored, they gave, offerings, and they thanked Diana for everything she had taught us. And there were walnut trees, there were wonderful witchy trees, and the ruins of her temple.
Yeah.
And you saw the reflection of yourself there, and you saw the reflection of Diana, and her dog came. And the minute we finished the ritual, the dog looked at us and went away. We never saw the dog again. And this is, again, her guarding her people. And this is when you feel called to these herbology, to everything that Diana teaches us. This is also, for me, the beginning, the essence of Wicca, and understanding, I used to tell stories about Diana, many of her first experiences on Earth, long time ago, and then later Aradia's experiences teaching people. That is a legacy of magic that we have now.
And that's a legacy. Also, these legacies come way ahead of the Jesus story.
Yes.
Where the goddess sends her daughter to liberate her people from oppression. She gets killed, sacrificed. She dies. 3 days later, she rises up. Sounds familiar? That story is much older.
Much older.
Much older. And again, we find the same concept in Sumeria in different names. In Babylonia, they excavate all these tablets basically, and now, of course, with the ability to understand a lot of their writings, we see that a lot of what we know now as religious writings or scripture or dogma even, or doctrine, is almost one-to-one copied from those times, basically.
Because the goddess sends her only daughter as a savior to humanity.
Right.
It's not really a man. It was never really a man.
It's not a new story. It's not a new story that the universe, whatever we want to call it, sends a savior of sort. You see, but God forbid it's a woman.
Right.
But every apparition, guys, look, I'm telling you, I'm a researcher. Every apparition, Machagore, Lourdes, Fatima,
in Ethiopia, when she came.
When we have an apparition, it's always the feminine. Never
a man.
God came,
No.
Father came, Joseph came, something.
That's a bilocation if it's a man.
And whenever
she comes,
she says always the same thing. I am the mother of God. She doesn't say, my name is Mary, I'm Mary Magdalene, or I'm your neighbor, or so. She says, I am the mother of God, which means only two things. Either she is the mother of the God that everybody worships right now. Already the church is in panic. They're already freaking out.
She's the mother.
Or she is the mother God. She is the consort, the wife of God. And that's what Melchizedek worships when Abraham comes and says, obey and bow to Yahweh. And he says, no, thank you so much. I surrender to the great supreme El Elyon, which is Mother, Father, God. That is the idea. And he blesses Abraham and says, off you go, but I'm not really interested in anything like this. You see, so this is this is why we also pay a lot of attention as a witch and as a powerful initiate is Eve from the garden, because she is blamed. She is basically the pawn of humanity, right? But what she does, she has children, and what some of you don't even know, and it's difficult to find, is that she had a daughter by the name Norea. And Norea, as the legend goes, is quite a feisty, rebellious lady, and she is, it is said, the third wife of Noah. So when Noah makes a deal with God and says, listen, Yahweh, destroy the planet, all these people who don't want to follow you, that's what he says. He's a sellout. So he says, save only me and my family in my ark, and we're going to give you a society that only will worship you. And God says, great. So when Norea sees that he builds the ark, she says, let me in. And he says, not you and your kind. So she burns the ark down. Number one. Daughters of Eve. Then he builds a second ark, because she burned the one. She says, let me in now. And he says, not you and your mother. She burns it down too. So he has to build the damn thing 3 times. And by the third time, Norea says, screw you, I'm out of here. And she goes and stays with the Nephilim, which is something that we talked already about. And
the real origin of witches is the Nephilim.
It's the Nephilim, is the divine spark, the spiritual DNA that we receive. And so she goes to them. So when Noah's ark finally, after 40 days, arrives on a piece of land, and they're all coming out, they say, wonderful, Yahweh, only for you. Oh shit, there is Norea and the giants. They survived. Okay, and it says in the read your Bible, 10% of the Nephilim survived. And so we are what we call witches, wizards, healers, shamans, sorcerers. It doesn't matter what you call. We are the descendants of
shamans,
but we are the descendants of the Nephilim. We survived. You see, that's why our kind, are survivors.
And we awaken our titanic blood at the same time,
right.
Which is then Hecate.
Exactly.
Hecate is a titan.
Right.
She is before the Greek gods that most people know about.
And even Zeus trembles before her. This is how, and you don't even know why, because, she seems to be, kind of all-powerful, but aren't all gods all-powerful? But they seem to respect her the most because she is fearless of her darkness. Yes. She doesn't mind her darkness. So when we call Hecate, we call her Dark Mother. And not because she's evil or because dark is some bad thing. But she is the idea that she's absolutely in charge of all her aspects, like all her polarities.
In Egypt, Sekhmet is a dark mother,
exactly.
Or a black Madonna is in Christianity.
Exactly.
But and Isis, she's also a wonderful dark
exactly.
mother.
Same concept, you see. But Hecate for us, of course, is the goddess of magic. And magic is something very specific. It's a science. 500 years ago, we called it witchcraft. Now we call it quantum physics. So get over yourselves. Okay? It just changed the title, but that's what it is. That's what it is. In those times, the witches, as we call them, didn't have Amazon and special candles and special herbs and God knows what.
Candles are recent,
Candles are a much more modern invention.
Yeah.
They had nothing but the trained connection to their own self and the understanding and the knowledge where they come from, you see. And I think that these stories that have been systematically extracted from scriptures, if we find them, but they've never been included, so everyone says, no, well, they're not part of the word. But the word is an echo of power in our soul, basically. And when we listen to that echo, the damage is done. We wake up, you see. And when you wake up, when you find yourself, everybody will call you difficult. That is the side effect. What is wrong with you, you see? But this is why also in the craft and initiate, when you enter, or when you want to be initiated in a circle or in a coven, the ritual is quite beautiful. The high priest will hold a knife against your chest and say, it is better to die by this dagger than enter the coven, the circle, with fear in your heart. How do you choose to enter? And the aspirant would say, with absolute love and absolute trust. Excuse me.
That's important.
And that is an important statement, absolute love and absolute trust. And this is one of the mantras we want to give you. You know, how do I choose to live today? With absolute love and absolute trust. How do I choose to do my work today? With absolute love and absolute trust. How do I choose to be loved? With absolute love and absolute trust. How do I choose to be respected? With absolute love and absolute trust. It's absolute love and absolute trust is what came before the word amen.
Yes. Absolutely.
Yeah, it is something that came way before the word amen, with absolute love and absolute trust. Yeah.
Whenever we call Hecate, I like to use her N, which is a mantra. Mantras in many traditions are called N's, E-N-N. And we call her Eyan, Katya, Eka, Hekat. Eyan, Katya, Eka, Hekat. Eyan, Katya, Eka, Hekat. And there are other mantras for Hecate, but that's the first one that we ever used. And she comes immediately when we call.
The mother will always run when she hears her child cry. It's in the nature of being a mother.
She's very protective.
But also, she's the crone. She's also, of
great.
course,
Strong.
the virgin, the emanation of purity.
Honest.
And she's the mother, but she's also the arcane wisdom upon which we call. And
we have photographs with her.
She manifested in our lives, definitely many times. And
as a whirlwind, remember, she came around a ritual.
And also with evidence. I mean, we had people there,
yes,
you know, who basically said, what the hell is going on? I said, what you got, you know, this is so funny, because they say, I wish I could see it. Then they see it and then they freak out. I mean, one way or another, you can't make it, you know, you can't make it work. But the idea is also that in the craft, healing is a very important element. That's why it's so connected to shamanism, yeah, and that the well-being of a society or of a village. That's why witches used to be, you know, first midwives. You always hear witch, midwife, witch, midwife. I mean, it's almost the same thing. Now, of course, we have witchcraft, which is accepted. It's called homeopathy.
Definitely derives from witches.
Absolutely, herbology. Plant extract. This is all witchcraft.
Many beauty products, the original ones from Helena Rubinstein, Estee Lauder. I think the original formulas from witches.
Yeah. Hildegard von Bingen, who was a nun, was a initiated witch who basically said, if I don't protect myself, I'm out of here. So I'm sure that she thought, you know, it doesn't matter what costume I wear, I have to preserve my knowledge. And basically, what her recipes are witchcraft, but because it's within the church, it's all fine.
But many witches had to become nuns, Christos.
Yes.
They had to hide. Yes. Otherwise, you get persecuted or killed.
Yeah.
Many witches had to fake Christianity in order to survive the witch burnings.
Yeah.
The fire time, the burning time.
Right.
All of that is a great, horrendous genocide.
Right.
Now, we know many Native Americans went through genocide, and, you know, African Americans and Africans all over the world went through, you know, attempts at genocide, and there's so many different cultures.
So many, and so this is also what
and
we sometimes. This is also sometimes what Foster and I discuss. What can we do to improve, you know, the world from these kind of.
Knowledge goes underground, and it will emerge again in us. That's what happens
with
us.
We really believe that the not the only way, because there are many ways, but the best way to rise above this primitive mind of thinking that I have to blame somebody in order to justify my misery, and so on, is really through spiritual maturity. It's the willingness to accept that we are all one. We are all connected to some degree. And the reason why we
Do not celebrate the blood, or
right,
for a woman to put a woman down for a menstruation.
right.
All these things. This is
Yeah.
the opposite of witchcraft.
Yeah.
This is the opposite of the empowerment of women.
And we don't say it's only women. It happens to men exactly. One,
Well,
it's
not about menstruation, but
not about. You never know these
or
days.
not to use your left hand, right? You only use your right hand.
I mean, you never know. But yet, exactly, it is how they force
bias.
children in general. How they force children to when they're left-handed to be trained to write with the right hand.
Ridiculous.
You see, I mean, I don't think anybody in his right mind would do this today, but we have, again, so many places where there's
The dogma.
conversion therapy. I mean,
Horrible.
you know, I mean, this is crazy stuff, but it is in the end.
We even have Christian witches now.
It is in the end
Yes.
misogyny, homophobia, and racism. People, there is no gentle way to say this, and there's no sugarcoating. People who react in such a way against a very peaceful way, a very natural way, are one of those things. Are one of those things.
We love witches' recipes. That's one of our favorite things.
They're quite fascinating.
And also kitchen witchcraft.
But we have to say some of these recipes are a little cuckoo.
Yeah.
Okay, when it says you need the egg of a chicken that's never seen the sun. I mean,
That's absurd.
you know what I mean? Of course, but it's so interesting because a lot of the grimoires were written in code.
Yes.
They were written in such a way, if they would fall into uninitiated hands, people say, what the hell is this? It's nonsense.
Like strawberry juice.
Like strawberry juice, you know, when they said...
Children's blood.
Children's blood, they would call it. So, of
The
course,
code.
a witch would say, oh, I need strawberry juice. But...
Not a real children's blood.
No, of course not. But they called it children's blood.
But the Christian didn't understand that.
Exactly. So here comes the priest and says, I told you they're sacrificing babies. You know what I mean? That's the idea. So again, let's not go so far to judge the idea of sacrifice, because remember, God tempts Abraham and says, sacrifice your son. The Mayans were full of sacrifices. I mean, roll off with the head. I mean, by the dozens, right?
Or they're throwing the girl in the volcano.
Throwing the girl in the volcano to
Another
hopefully...
misogyny.
There you go. You see, but it was always, again, in its core, to systemically destroy true divine feminine identity. And it's on the rise. I tell you, if the one thing I think we learned in this last years, especially working together, is that the feminine, once it's empowered, it's an unbound potential that is free from the need to be guided, from the need to be told what to do. And this is what we always say. I mean, we love if you come, you know, I mean, that's our income too in our work, but we want you to not need anyone, including us at some point. And
You know,
we are more than happy to help, as we always have done for decades, to help you guys, male and female, by the way, and non-binary. We love you too. I don't get it, but I love you.
You know, my mother never wanted to go to church, so she didn't go. But, you know, on Easter, she went to Greek Orthodox Church. But she would say, you know, I refuse to be a fascist, when they were trying to force us in Greece to be fascists. And my mother, later on, when she died, she appeared to us as a woman naked. I've never seen my mother naked. I've never actually barely seen her in a bathing suit. And there she was swimming. I'm naked, I'm free, I'm a witch. And when my mother died that day, a beautiful, in the middle of Los Angeles, I think I've said this before, in our backyard was a giant stag deer. Like a giant deer, the spirit of the forest. And this is the middle of LA, you know, it's not a normal sight. Yeah. And there was this giant deer, and it stood right at us and said, your mother's dead. Right. That's what we got as a message. And so the phone rang, and somebody told us my mother is dead. That the spirit of the forest was saying, you know, your mother is a witch.
Right.
A good one, a wonderful one, a true one.
An artist.
An artist.
Artists are often witches, by the way.
And, you know, it opened my heart to everything like that, too.
Yeah.
My mother was the conduit for me, and for you it was your grandmother.
Right.
She was quite an
my mother used to do something very funny when we passed the church. She would spit at the door and say, do your cross, but remember, they're idiots. she would spit on it
like,
because she would look down on them. It's like, you're not going to tell me who I am, but she now make your cross but remember, it means nothing. But do your cross now. A fascinating concept, by the way.
And Mary herself was quite an independent woman. We're talking about Mother Mary, right? The mother of Christ.
Right.
Jesus. Anyway, something amazing who she was. She was a defender of women. She was a defender of the weak. She was the woman who would say to one of her, servants, people that worked in the hotels that she stayed in, because she was constantly on the run later in life. She would say to them, I will help you so that man doesn't beat you anymore.
Right.
And she would empower women to leave men like that.
Yeah.
That's divorce.
Yeah.
That is leaving husbands. That's Mary.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Magdalene, as we know, was a very wealthy woman.
Absolutely.
Her family owned the ports all over the Mediterranean.
This is so important. You have to stop. This is another good example. A woman of power, she's a whore.
Right.
She's a slut. Or she was possessed by the demons, but that's another Virgin Mary, because there's Mary. No, there's Marys in the Bible, but which one is it now? But we declare them into whores, into sluts, or into something that is damaged and needs a man to be healed. Again, I'm highly allergic to that concept. It is misogyny in the bow of religion.
Well, look at France. France had the Cathars. They have equal male and female, priest and priestess.
Right.
They said, we can be equal. This is the legacy of Mary and Mary Magdalene.
Absolutely.
There, especially in Beaume, in the south of France, in Provence.
And in my research, Mary Magdalene her father is a wealthy man who owns the ports. He owns ships. She's rich. The girl is loaded. So Jesus got himself a sugar mama, okay?
Bankrolls everything.
And bankrolls everything, absolutely. But this is not somebody who just rolled in from the streets. But this is how the narrative goes, you see. And this is where misogyny is. A powerful woman is a slut. She's a whore. Look at Madonna. Why can't she... This, again, here we go.
The singer you're talking about.
The singer Madonna, which she can do no wrong to me, because she is a true ally of feminism. A true, but what we hear now...
An outspoken rebel woman who's spiritual.
You see, and now she's reduced to, look what she looks like.
Yeah, that's absurd.
You see, she can have a third boob on her head. Who cares? It's her body. She can do whatever she wants. But the way she presented herself was a lot of breaking taboos, you see, and empowering. So she did a great deal for the craft, if you want, without even touching, not to my knowledge, touching a candle and calling a spell. But you can represent the very idea of liberated feminism, and you're going to be reduced to people can't even give a normal compliment anymore. They say you look great for your age. You see, it's misogyny. Why can't you say you look great? The dress is beautiful. I love your shoes. Also to men, you look amazing for your age. What the hell does that mean? You know what I mean? But this is how we hide our misogyny, or I hear, I don't like all those homos, but you're a wonderful gay. You're one of my gays. I'm like, what am I, a poodle?
Or the idea of Pandora. They always make Pandora's box the evil thing, and the last thing that is in it is, all the misfortune of the world.
Exactly.
And that's not true. She's a birther.
Right.
She is birthing out of her womb humankind.
Right.
And she birthed our very best traits, and they demonized her.
Right.
And this is something they do to women. They like to demonize them in history.
Right.
And Pandora's legacy is Mary.
Right.
Mary is, many generations later, the essence of Pandora.
Right.
How she creates out of her own womb.
Yes.
And many women like that, from Lilith onward, they have always relegated them to something less than. Then you have Joan of Arc. They always have to be martyred, even though they honor the divine feminine.
Right.
We love Joan of Arc.
And I think this is an important story, because what happens to a feminine, being that helps to win the war, gets clarity. Hypatia is another.
Hypatia.
If you don't know who Hypatia is, you should be extracted
the
from
most
this planet.
intelligent woman ever to have lived.
Of her time. She was a huge scholar. She ran the Alexandrian libraries. Of course, dies in the hands of the church, as usual. Laurie Bruno, our friend,
through the streets,
is a descendant of Giordano Bruno,
who was accused of witchcraft.
Okay, a long time before Newton and Copernicus says the world spins around the sun. We're not the center of the universe. And they burnt him. And I think Laurie says in one of her interviews that the Vatican sent her a apology, sorry for the murder of your ancestor. And they have now a statue somewhere in Vatican City. But, this is what happens. You kill, you destroy life. And what it will do is it will amplify the fury and the fire that breaks through oppression.
Well,
we are exactly in that point.
I love that they accuse the women, witches, of worshipping Lucifer or worshipping what they call the devil. First of all, Lucifer is not the devil,
right?
But anyway, and they said we have no idea who that is,
right?
But in essence, Lucifer, they have a chapel to Lucifer, in the Vatican down below, and Lucifer is the light bringer, is the son of Venus.
Right.
Again, we're getting into
the morning star.
The morning star,
right.
And we're talking about Venus here.
Yeah.
And, all the goddesses of love and all the goddesses of power. But the original temples to Venus, and very much witchcraft.
Absolutely. And also, Lucifer is a reference point to Pan, of course.
Right.
The green man, the earth man that is shameless, you see, has no shame over sexuality and body. With the shame over sexuality comes also the power over sexuality.
And Freyr for us, she's a witch. Freyr in the Nordic
tradition.
And there are many others. And the traditions of the seers or seer.
Yeah.
We honor these women.
Yeah.
And they have always been around. So one of the things we want to say here in this podcast is find the wise woman in you.
Right.
Follow or find women who are becoming what I would say the next teachers or the next mothers for this new generation, or crones for the new generation. And let's honor these generations and their wisdom. Let's find these grimoires again and work with them.
And to all the women, come out wherever you are and fight for each other, because men, as you've seen, don't do it.
They don't do it.
You see, don't hope that men...
Some do, but...
and maybe men should also not do it, because they cannot fight your fight, as you cannot be dragged in their fight. And that's, I think, what is very important for us when we follow these paths. And we hope we can contribute individually and together to a relaxed view of what the craft is, because it's a celebration of the truest identity of every being, that is male and female, yin and yang, right? It must be. And I think once we accept this, without the fear to be labeled gay or effeminate or butch or cold-hearted or a cold fish or God knows what, to accept that we can be both, we should be both actually, and that once we achieve this maturity in our system, we don't feel the need to judge it in somebody else. But this is what happens very often in religion, we have to say, any form of religion. People work on themselves. Finally, they get there. Finally, they break through. Finally, they have an enlightenment. And then they start to judge everybody who doesn't do it their way. I mean, buzz off.
I want to leave you with something. When I was a kid, I was walking through the gardens of my family, and there we had aviaries, these huge cages, and we had mandarin ducks in this one cage. And there was a woman in a cape, a black cape, very beautiful, kind of a distinguished older woman. And I thought she was a patient of my father. My father was a psychiatrist, and we had all these grounds, and, I thought she was just waiting for her appointment. And she looked directly at me, and I went up to her. I felt such a connection to her. And I realized that was my first meeting with a witch. And that was my first meeting with a being. I don't know that she was really my father, my father's patient. I think she was really coming to visit. And a few days after that, I was again walking very near there, and a blackbird came and sat on my head. And my sister was laughing, and she ran to get her camera to take a photo, and the bird flew away the minute she tried to take a photo. And I felt, this kind of enlightenment, this time period, the blackbird, this woman, these initiations when you're just a little kid and the goddess comes. And I have never forgotten the feeling of those days. The stag in the garden and all the ways in which you are called to a craft. I'm a shaman, and yet I embraced all of this completely and felt really part of a tradition, a lineage from my mother. and many women. And my mother, who later on they tried to suppress her. They gave her lots of, endless antibiotics, and then, antidepressants and, popping pills. And my poor mother, to be a good woman, not to feel, not to feel less than whatever, she took all these pills, and it ruined her. But then the minute she's out of her body, she's free. And that's one of the most important hallmarks of a witch, is freedom, liberation from every kind of dogma, from any kind of belief system, in which you finally do follow your true
and
heart,
understand,
your true self, your true mind.
And understand that you are enough.
You're enough.
You're enough. And I want to leave you with the idea and the thought that you need no one to tell you what's right for you. That is the true power. So maybe at the end you say, well, if you don't want us to call us witches, what should we call ourselves? Powerful, loving, arcane embodiment of pure force, of titanic nature of the universe. How about that? So, here we go again. You see, this is a last minute podcast. I tell you. Oh, no, I forgot. Share, subscribe, and like. Share, subscribe, and like. I'm telling you, I'm really bad at this. But we want to send you a love, and we want to send you a love and confidence and self-esteem. And we see you and we hear you and we're watching the world.
And we're in New England right now.
We're in
New Hampshire. There's a beautiful coven of a man. There's a wonderful coven right here of this woman that we live in. We're living in her house. These people have all come together in New England because the minute you have forests and you have traditions like this. So witches came on the Mayflower. Okay, they didn't say that they were witches then, but all the old witch families were also wanting religious freedom.
The craft is alive.
And they came to America.
Is alive.
They brought it here.
Absolutely.
And
we know that because we're representing it, we're living it.
That's the Statue of Liberty. Right. She holds the light, a torch in her hand.
The ultimate witch.
And she calls women to be liberated here in America. Yes. And that's really New York and all these things. So we've been in this generation. We always think about the witches who buried something in Central Park for later. They buried so much knowledge and information.
Anyway,
we honor you.
The information is in you. But
in you.
Share, subscribe, and like. Share, subscribe, and like. That's my favorite spell right now. Share, subscribe, and like. Thank you so much. And we want to let you go, guys, with the traditional goodbye of the craft. Merry meet, merry part, and merry meet again. Take good care of yourselves.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Bye-bye, guys.
Bye.